Well, welcome to today's webinar about the top 10 questions that we get about our digital reel application. I'm Will, and with me today, the other small screen that you'll see on here, someone helping me out today is Brad Gilbert. He's our Executive Vice President, also Head of Software, so he's intimately familiar with digital reel. So I'll be leading this, but Brad will provide some colorful commentary to help fill in the gaps and things that I miss and things that are important from the software side. Let's get going. So today's purpose for you is to get you the answers to the most asked DR questions instead of you trying to think about what should I ask. These are the top 10 that we get. I got this from our tech team as well as our sales team. So these are very familiar to us. We get asked them a lot. And secondly, you want to understand if digital reel is right for you. That's really the goal. You could get answers to these questions and use that information to think, is this right for me? Do I want to be using digital reel for my records? And then quickly, before getting to the actual presentation here, some nuts and bolts. If you could please use the Zoom sidebar and just click the little hand button to raise your hand so I can make sure that y'all can hear me. That'd be great if we can get some of those. Perfect. I see a couple going up, so that means it is working. Thank you very much. You can put the hand down again. But then raise it again if you can see my screen, which you should see the screen that says nuts and bolts on it. Perfect. I got a few people raising their hands, so it is working. Fantastic. You are muted. You're not on video, so don't worry about being seen by anyone else or anything of that sort. It's just Brad and myself that will be able to speak and show our screen here and be on video. So use the chat tool specifically in Zoom if you have questions. So you can ask questions along the way. If I see them while we're going along, I'll stop and try to answer them when we see them. If not, there is a little bit of time at the end that I can then round up and see any questions that were not asked and get those answered. But jumping right into it, what is digital reel before we get to the questions? And digital reel is our homegrown application that we utilize for mostly records hosting, and we'll get into the options available, but primarily it's a hosting application. So you access it via internet connected devices. You just get through on the web. This is the login screen, and that is what digital reel is. It was actually created from a QA, a quality checking tool we had, and then we developed it into a customer facing application. So many of our customers use this to host their records, typically after we scan them in a conversion project. So the first question, and typical of any sort of project or service if you're working with someone, is how much does it cost? So it, of course, depends on a few things, such as the quantity of records that you want to put into the system. And again, I'm going to primarily speak about hosting. So if we're doing box scanning, paper scanning, how many boxes do you have? How many pages are there? If you're doing microfilm scanning, how many rolls have we scanned and are we going to host? Cards like Apture cards or microfiche. The quantity of materials and then data will be part of the determining factors of how much it costs for you to host within digital reel. Security level, that to us means what type of data is on the records that we'll be hosting. If you have something like newspaper records, for instance, let's say your library, that's public information, non-sensitive, that's a lower security level. In our world, it's security level 1. If you are a university, let's say you're a registrar's office and you have student records, that would be level 3. Different types of data and different types of material require different processes of how we handle material. So that will be a factor. How many users you have is, of course, a factor as well. How many people do you need accessing these files? And then the number of data sets. So a lot of ways to peel the orange with digital conversion, but if you have a lot of document types or different parts of your organization, you want to split up your application so certain people can access certain data sets, meaning certain records are in these distinct data sets, that can be part of it as well. An example is we're working with a Superior Court in California, and they have, I think, Brad, you can correct me if I'm wrong, maybe 10 or 15 distinct data sets. So we have to create a specific data set and allow these users to access them. So those various data sets and keeping track of that in our hosted platform can add to the cost. But very high level ballpark, let's say you're doing box scanning, you're looking about $2 to $3 per box per year. Or if you're doing microfilm, $2 to $3 per role per year. So that's very high level just to get you a baseline, but all these factors will be part of that. Brad, is there anything else that you would see or you think you could add to this that would be part of cost factors?
Indexing requirements, image quality or the quality of the original material can be significant as well.
So when Brad says indexing requirements, that would mean, let's say we're scanning microfilm rolls for you. Once we scan them, we have to index them, meaning digitally name the file. So depending on what type of indexing you require, that can tie into this because I believe, Brad, it'll add different layers to your digital reel application, which is a bit more complicated than if you do, let's say, a roll level, just very high level, one roll equals one file, compared to image level indexing, where you might have thousands of images that are indexed and each require a different level. Would that be a decent way to explain it?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So again, ballpark, $2 to $3 per year for a box or a roll. That can be broken down for microfiche or data set sizes and whatnot, but that's just a very high ballpark to get you started. Number 2 is digital reel proprietary. So two-part answer, yes, it is our application. We built it, we own it, the product, the intellectual property, everything around that. It is our application. However, the answer is no in the sense of the images and data. If you're hosting your records with us, that's your data. We don't own that. And the perfect analogy one of my sales reps came up with a long time ago is the parking garage, meaning digital reel is like the garage. We own the garage, we own the space, we keep it clean, we make check people in and out. But if you park your car in the garage, you're just using the garage, but the car is yours. BMI doesn't own the car or lend the car to you. It's your car, it's your data. So the application proprietary, yes. The images and data, that's yours. Anything else on this part of it, Brad?
Nope, that's it.
And this has just been a great analogy that I've used probably hundreds of times. It just clicks for people when they ask this question. Security is an absolute, well, top 3. I mean, here it is on the top, number 3. I think that's just how I laid them out, but that is a very common question about security and is digital reel secure for hosting data, especially if you have sensitive records. Yes, we believe it is secure. And there are many ways that we improve security for your records. And of course, you saw on that login screen that I showed earlier, typically, it's not always, but typically our clients will have individual users with individual logins and passwords. So that's one way. Of course, you have to have an account to get in. But then additionally, we can make permission-based access, meaning if you have multiple data sets or document types within your records, you can restrict people within your user group of who sees what data. So if you, let's say, have half of your data set are sensitive records that you only want a few people in your organization to see, and then the other half anyone can see, you may split those groups where some people can see just the non-sensitive data, and then a few hand-selected people can see everything. So there are permission-based ways to restrict usage. We have multi-factor authentication. So when you log in, you have to not only have the password and your login name, but then you have to authenticate it and verify it via another method. So that adds another level of security. IP address locking means if I'm in, let's say I'm a county department and we're using digital reel, that can be locked down to the IP address of that physical location. So even though it's a web-based application and theoretically you can access it from anywhere, if you decide you only want your users to be able to access it, if they're within the building basically where that IP is assigned to, we can do that. So you can restrict where people use the data. So they can't go home and then access the records as well, let's say. Or, especially after the COVID times, a lot of people working at home, we had a lot of customers contact us and ask us to actually implement IP filtering at people's homes. So their users that had to get to these records, but they couldn't be in the office, they gave us their home IP address, and through their organization, they approved us adding that IP filter so they could access records from that location. They can't do it anywhere. They have to be at their home office basically to do it, but that's another way to increase security. segmented hosting environments. We have, I think we have upwards of 400 or so clients hosting, and they're segmented based on a security level. So you have the non-sensitive folks, then we have higher level security folks, then we're a CJIS listed company. It's criminal justice information. So we have law enforcement records that we host, and those are a segmented part of our hosting environment. It's actually a bit separate from the other records. And then we have private hosting tenants where clients tell us they want their records separate from everybody else. That's what would be called private tenant hosting. And that's another way to increase security of your data. I just mentioned that, the private hosting option. So those are ways within the application to secure it. Is there anything I missed that you would add to this, Brad?
Yeah, I would suggest the company is SOC 2 Type 2 certified, so security really starts there with the security of the entire organization, the network, the physical security. The website also goes through annual gray box testing. So that penetration includes essentially a team of hackers attempt to hack into a separate website, has no customer data, and they try to find vulnerabilities. We also do monthly automated security scans, which attempt to find the easy holes that might exist. Our code repository requires any developer that submits a change that another developer actually has to review it. And then the lead developer actually merges those changes, so that keeps vulnerabilities from being introduced that way as well.
Yeah, I was focusing more, thank you for the additions. I was focusing more on, with when you're in the data set, but of course, absolutely, all of that ties together, not only the application itself, but how the application is protected from by the company. So yes, we're audited. We have all those things that Brad mentioned, and security is definitely top of mind, especially with the records we host, and just knowing that this is your data. Even if it's not sensitive data, it's still important to you. It could be public information, but it might be the only record you have of something. So we're always thinking about security and how to protect your data. So where are my records stored? So we have 2 data centers, one of which is in our headquarters in Sunnyvale, California, in the office that actually Brad is in right now. It's about 2 rooms away from him. So that's one of our data centers where many of the records are hosted. We also have a colo or co-location site in Sacramento. We use NTT Global. The site is not at our Sacramento facility, but it's basically down the street from it. So next to our 2 locations, in our headquarters and then next to our Sacramento location, are the 2 data centers that we use for hosting. And the reason we have 2 data centers is in case something happens to one, then your data would be at the colo site, either or. So Sacramento, for some reason, if something happened at NTT, we would still have the records continually hosted at our Sunnyvale location, and vice versa. If something happens like PG&E cuts the power by mistake, which has happened where they cut a power line, so the power may go down for 30 minutes or an hour or something while they fix it, but Sacramento is still running. So it allows that redundancy and continual hosting of data, even if something happens at one of the sites. So they're separated by about, I think it's like 120 miles, 2 hours drive-ish. So separated physically and of course digitally as well. And then there's Brad, you may want to describe the dynamic routing portion of what that means. You probably describe it better than I would. So I already mentioned the redundancy, but I'll let Brad talk about the dynamic routing.
Yeah, we actually do a power shutdown test every 6 months on a Saturday, where we shut down the entire Sunnyvale data center to confirm that the system actually fails over to the colo site correctly, as expected. So when that happens, after the user logs in, they click on a data set and they're automatically routed to the colo. And if both sites are up simultaneously, what happens is it's essentially a random selection between one or the other. And so what we do is we use that capability to distribute load more evenly across the system. But if those nodes are not available, then all requests will go to the other site.
So from a kind of a layperson's perspective, the idea with the dynamic routing is, of course, if one is down, the other one's available. But when they're both up, the system is effectively trying to route you to the best option at that moment. So from me, not a software person, that's kind of how I think of it. I make a request and Digital Reel will say, this one's best right now, you go there. Or it might say, you could log in or access something 20 minutes later, say, go this one this time. And there are multiple nodes at each site, but that's how I like to describe it, how I understand it. But that is where your records are stored if you're hosting with us. This is asked a lot. It's not a long answer, but people ask us very often about single sign-on. And yes, we do provide that with Google and Microsoft single sign-on. Brad, can you give a quick description of what that means for those on the webinar that may not know what that is?
Yeah, what that means is that Google and Microsoft is actually going to store your credentials, your authentication credentials. So BMI would not have a username and password for you. Google or Microsoft would have that. And we actually still enforce the authorization layer of the system. So once you do authenticate using those mechanisms, then our system will still enforce what you're able to actually do in the system and we're actually able to see.
Thank you very much. Now, implementation options. This is what I referred to early on when I was just introducing Digital Reel and talking about primarily hosting. So hosting is what we do. I'd say, well, it's about 95% of our clients are hosting, maybe more. So you're accessing it through the internet, through an internet connected device. It can be accessed through your phone, an iPad, a tablet. Typically it's through a computer. A lot of our clients are public government and folks that are going to be in the office at their computer. That's primary, but you can access through other devices. There is an on-site option. I'd say 10 years ago, the on-site version was probably at least 50% of clients, but very quickly in the early 2010s, more folks started transitioning and either converting their on-site version to a hosted option, and then people nowadays rarely ask for on-site. It is an option though, so you may want just the package, the application to be an on-site version, and you just have it a local network or through a local workstation. Or some of our clients will then host the on-site version of Digital Reel through another platform such as AWS. But I think I don't have the exact number, but just anecdotally, it's probably less than 5% of clients that are on site as of today. Also, there are the maintenance and upgrade considerations. So if we're hosting, we're continually updating the application just in the background. You don't have to do anything. You're getting hosting, you're paying for hosting, so you're getting the most up-to-date version while you're on there. If you're on the on-site version, there will be maintenance associated with it and potential upgrade considerations depending on if it's I call a small upgrade, like we're right in the version we're on right now is Digital Reel 6.10 XXXXXX, many different numbers, but 6.10. So those small upgrades like 6.10 to 6.11 or 12 or how many ever we will have, those will be part of maintenance. But a larger conversion to the next version, like Digital Reel version 7, when that does come out, that may not be included in maintenance because that's a much more substantial and complex upgrade. So that's something to consider when you do take something on site, that you're not getting the automatic upgrades that hosting would entail. Anything additional that you think would be useful to differentiate the two, Brad?
Yeah, I would say customers seldom take it in-house just because of IT cost and maintenance, and storage cost certainly is one of the factors. But sometimes they do take it in-house just because they have their own internal rules about hosted data. But that's why we see it so infrequently, because it is expensive to do it yourself.
True. Size of data sets, as Brad just mentioned, I forgot to click that one. Data sets can be quite massive. It may not seem like you could have, just using microphone example, you could have 1,000 rolls of microphone. I think, okay, it's 1,000 rolls that fits in 10 bankers boxes. It's not a lot of material. But what we provide, depending on the quality of the actual original material and how the images, when they come out, what's on them, the density of them, how the film was created, and this can apply to paper as well, and there's other data. You could have multiple terabytes of data. We have a couple clients that are in the petabytes of data where you take that on site, and if you're not planning for what's required, not just for the application, but how to actually create the environment for that application, it can be expensive and just beyond what you may want to do. So that is occasionally a reason that folks continue to host or start hosting, is it's just less of a hassle. A lot of times you don't have to kind of build up your own data center for these records. So that's something that is a consideration. All right, what if I discontinue hosting? So this is often asked before we actually start hosting. Let's say we're doing a scanning project. This will be something that a soon-to-be client will ask us, well, great, I want to host, but what happens if I decide to cancelize for whatever reason? Well, what we call cropped images. So this is another term we use for this, is traditional. So let's say you are going to go digital ReeL hosting, but you want to know what you can do and maybe have a backup for later. Cropped images would be like a PDF or TIFFs or JPEGs, what you would typically imagine when you hear digitization or scanning records. You're getting that traditional format. So we can crop the images either from your digital ReeL data set. If you do it, let's say, a year after you start, or 5 years later, say, I think I'm just going to take these offline. We don't use them anymore, whatever it is. We would crop the images from your digital ReeL data set and then provide them to you in that traditional format. PDFs, TIFFs, JPEGs. And what we do is provide it to you either through FTP, file transfer protocol, basically electronic delivery, or we just put those on a USB and deliver them to you that way. If it's sensitive material, it'll be encrypted USB. And often what we'll do, if you're in digital ReeL and you want to take it off later, we'll just export by the digital ReeL indexing. So however it's indexed in the system, we'll just replicate that and send them to you like a multi-page PDF or foldered files based on whatever is in the application. So you get the same style of record, how to find the records. This can be provided during the original project. So again, this is something that folks will do quite often, is they'll want to go hosting, they'll want to use digital ReeL, but they'll just get those cropped images right off the bat so that they have it as a backup, and just for whatever, they just keep it in the background in case they ever need it, or they want to discontinue hosting. There's not a separate step later on. They already have the images, and we basically, while we're creating digital ReeL, we would also create the cropped images at the same time and deliver those to you so you have them from the beginning. So if you decide to discontinue, you can either do it at the end and we get those images to you later, or you can just do it from the start and have those ready. So you say, hey, I'm done. Okay, we turn it off. All's well. So the two options if you want to discontinue. Anything I missed there, Brad?
Just when you get cropped images, you lose the full film archive copy. That if you have microfilm rolls or microfiche, you're going to lose the aspects of the film with a cropped deliverable, where digital ReeL is intended to maintain that along with the adjustable grayscale. So those are just trade-offs of the cropped images that you just won't have when you don't have digital ReeL.
And some of the things Brad is mentioning, of course, there's a lot more we could talk about with digital ReeL. We are keeping it fairly tight on just answering the questions themselves, but yes, I think you can almost guarantee there's a recorded webinar on our YouTube channel that's about digital ReeL and what you get with it, or there are videos aplenty and articles about why it's distinct and why it's unique and what could be useful. But that historical context and some other items are definitely something you would lose if you get the cropped images compared to using the application. So this is very similar to the previous question. It's a sort of a dark question, but that's fine. We get it asked a lot as well, saying, okay, I'm hosting with you. Well, what happens if you guys close? It's very similar to number 7 about what if I want to discontinue? You can get the cropped images. And again, the best way to have that backup, digital ReeL we mentioned, we have our own internal backup. We have the headquarters data center. We have the colo data center. We also have backups internally. We probably have backups of the backups. Brad's the expert on this one. But something you should think about when you are getting a digitization project is not necessarily just, okay, the company I'm hosting with, BMI or someone else, whoever it is, well, they have my data, they're hosting, but do you have a backup? So that's where that cropped images can really come into play is if you just get those from the beginning, one, it makes it much simpler. It's not you're hosting, you didn't get those early on, now it's 5 years later and you want these images. It's actually kind of a project in itself. Whereas if you do it from the beginning, we can include it and do it kind of part of the original project. So you get those right away, but also you have those as a backup for just sort of a risk mitigation aspect. So yes, we can get you the cropped images. If we know we're going out of business, or of course we don't plan to, we've been in business for 65 years and we plan to continue for a while. But having those cropped images and having your own backup early on is essential. Don't rely on necessarily whoever you work with to be, to keep those for you. Have your own as well. Have that part of your mindset of when you go into a scanning project of, okay, what happens if I can't get these from someone, whoever it is, if something happens. So just keep that in mind. Any additions, Brad?
Nope.
So where does the conversion take place? So it's kind of a weird one because the conversion, when we hear conversion, that's related to the actual digitization. So that's how we typically answer this question when we say, hey, where does the conversion take place? Well, the conversion, if we're doing your digitization project, so you have 1,000 boxes of files and you want to get them scanned and host them, typically the actual project of scanning those records, taking them from hard copy to digital, that's the conversion aspect. That will typically be done at one of our facilities or both potentially. It can be done on site, but 99% of the time it's done at our facilities because we're set up for it. It's just a much more streamlined process and it's a more cost-effective way for both parties, you and us, to do it at our facilities. So that's where the conversion would take place. The hosting, well, the processing of the images, the software development, Brad's team, the actual hosting. So that's done at BMI. All this aspect, processing software, indexing, running the project. We're doing that through the BMI team, and then hosting is, of course, we have the 2 data centers. So just to kind of clarify, conversion is the actual taking it from analog to digital, and then the hosting is really a separate part. But this is a question that does get asked fairly frequently, so that's why we have it here and just clarifying that. Actually, sorry, anything on this one, Brad? Anything to?
Nope, you covered it.
And lastly, number 10 is, can I scan and upload directly? The answer is yes. It is a feature that can be enabled. It's not automatically enabled, but it can be. And I think we have a number of clients on that. It's a little more rare. It's not a very common feature that people ask for. And that's because DR, digital ReeL, it was created to be a very simple, in a good way, very simple and streamlined application. There are very few features. One way to think about it is, I'm sure anyone on this webinar who's watching uses Word, Microsoft Word. There are probably 1,000 different things you can do in Word, and you probably use 10 of them. So instead of having an application, there are probably hundreds of document management systems. Instead of having another one that has just bells and whistles all over and 50 different or 100 different things you can do, we have a very limited and tight group of features that really gets the meat of what people will use while they're in digital ReeL. So it is geared toward an archival system. So of course, microfilm, microfiche, paper files, a lot of back file projects. It's built around that idea. Of course, we do have other features that are we can implement, or we continue to build and add new things very rarely, or not as often as other document management systems, just because the archival system is really the basis of what the application is. So can it be enabled? Can you scan and load directly? Yes, it's just not a common a common feature that does get enabled once we really get into discussions of what they're looking for and how they're trying to use the application. What else could you add to that, Brad?
Yeah, I would say if you're doing it one at a time, it's kind of tedious to upload to the system. So most customers, they use SFTP. And we have a workflow that downloads it from the SFTP site. Usually that includes some indexing or image processing. And then within an hour or two, it'll show up on Digital Reel.
Yeah, so when you say ones and twos, so the two methods or two types of projects, high level in a nutshell. There's the back file conversion, there's the go forward scanning. So most of our projects are back file projects. So someone has 1,000 boxes, 10,000 rolls, 50,000 microfiche, whatever it is. So they're not doing those one at a time and loading it to a system individually. They're saying, I need to get all this into something now. So that's primarily what we're doing. We're getting these large collections scanned and into the system. And many of these collections that are back file, they're not necessarily accessed amazingly frequently. So they don't, the people don't need a system to necessarily continually add new pieces of information or update the data. But if they need to, then that's that go forward where it is maybe onesies, twosies, or a couple items at a time, which can be enabled. Or like Brad said, we can just set up a process flow where it's just sent to us and we implement it and load it to the system. So yes, you can upload directly. It's just not something that actually gets utilized often. So those are the top 10 questions that we get about the application. There are always a couple, or there are always other ones, but those are the top 10. And it's just good to get those to you so you know if you had those on your mind, you were thinking about them, they're already answered, at least to the degree we have done today in the webinar. But I'm going to see if there are any questions either about the topics we already covered, or if there are questions about anything else related to Digital ReeL. So give me a couple seconds here to check that. I don't see any at the moment. Let me just do a quick check and pop that up. Okay, don't see any at the moment, but feel free to add a question as we kind of wrap it up here. So if you have any comments, questions, you have a project, you're thinking about Digital ReeL, you can reach out to me. There's my simple version of the email, will@bmimaging.com. If you're not already signed up, we do have a bi-weekly newsletter. So every other Tuesday, an email gets sent out that has the newest articles, videos, webinars that are coming up, things of that sort. You can just put your phone up, capture the QR code, on the camera. It'll take you right to the sign up website. You just put in your email and you can drop it. You can opt out anytime, but you'll start getting newsletters every other Tuesday. One actually went out yesterday. So 2 weeks from now, you get the first newsletter if you sign up today. One last check on the questions. I don't see any. So thank you for joining. Hope you learned something about this. And again, if you have questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you, Brad. That wraps it up for the day.